So a member of the forum asked about the Indonesian currency, and so I took a look at it, and actually it's a good exercise for anybody who wants to get a grip on how to measure these things out. I'm gonna show you what's going with the Indonesian currency, but there's actually a good example. The Indonesian currency is not unlike what happened with the ruble and the Australian dollar, and so I'm going to show you that first. So here is the Australian dollar versus the ruble, going all the way back to 1995, but I would suggest that that's pretty accurate in as much as the ruble fell apart in 1992. So it's been a couple of years jerking around, and so as far as I'm concerned, that's when the ruble really began. So here you have just this march that happened up over time as we pulled through the 90s into the 2000s, etc., pretty ho-hum, but constantly higher highs and lower lows, higher, lower, higher. But that created what's called a measured move. And what a measured move is that we had, so once again, if you look at the Elliott principles, markets move in 5 waves in one direction, then with a small retracement. And so we have 1, 2, the third wave is always the longest, like as far as duration. So 1, 2, and then this is the third one here. This is all part of the macro wave, and this happens in 2014. And then there's resolution. This will be, down here would be about the 4th, so 3, 4, and then we have a final push to the upside. And that's something you can measure. So for example, I'll use my handy dandy arrow tool. I mean, I could show you exact numbers, but I just use this as a visual representation, if you will. So bear with me while I put this in place. It's highly cooperative. So we take this arrow and we place it here at 66.17, drawing down to the bottom at roughly 264. All we then have to do is then place it on the 4th advance, and boom. Now, this is highly impulsive. This is a wick, which basically, when the war happened, which is probably one of the most impulsive things that can happen, everybody and their grandma was dumping rubles for any other currency they could get. So you can see this huge spike, and you would also see this in the American dollar chart. And so this is a frenzy. But you had there this consolidation pattern, which is a triangle, and then finally it shot up. And now the ruble is going to decimate it's going to escalate in value, exponential value over the Australian dollar. There's no question about that. So let's look at the Indonesian chart, which is actually like this chart, only back in time a little bit. So the Indonesian chart back in, I have no idea of the Indonesian politics and when their currency began, etc., but we're going to this chart is drawing to 1988, okay? So we have pretty ho-hum lackluster performance here in regard to the Aussie versus the Indonesian currency. But back here it's 1248, and by the time, and that's in 1988, and 10 years later, we're up at 10,419. So clearly the Australian dollar appreciates versus the Indonesian. That part of the world has got a lot of bedlam going on, so it doesn't surprise me. But it gives that drawing point that I was telling you about earlier. So once again, this little arrow here is that drawing point. So now this is a more protracted chart, and we'd have to expand this to go, we did that count we were talking about earlier. I would expand this out and you'd see how that all plays out here, because this is the month chart. But once again, this is the measure. So then we take it to the 4 point, and look there. And so it looks like there is some more upside for the Australian dollar versus the Indonesian. And that looks like it's going to be somewhere around 13,281. Now, there's going to be looks like there's going to be some kind of finishing pattern here in the Indonesian versus the Australian. And what we have here is we have a inverse head and shoulders. So this is a shoulder, this is a head, this is a shoulder, okay? And the measurement of that, you can gain, these are patterns you can look up if you like. There's head and shoulders patterns, but there's also what's called inverse head and shoulders patterns. So this pattern here, this is the neckline right here. This is final confirmation, and if we draw this one up to the neckline, you can see we come in very close proximity to the measured move here. I think that will be the final hurrah for the value of the Aussie dollar versus the Indonesian. When will that happen? Well, if we take this one here, and this is the radial. Now again, the radial is an excellent predictor. When you can see the past, you can see the future. So let's just take the radial here and just do a little bit of manipulation as far as basically what we want to do is we want to have what's called Fibonacci touch points. Bear with me here while we draw this out. You can spend hours making this work precisely, but the sweet spot is trying to get as much touch as you can on as many points as possible, because that gives you the most accurate predictor of the future as far as currency movements, especially, or any indices movement, especially as it pertains to targets. So that's pretty good. We got a touch point here, we got a touch point here, here. And again, when I say like these impulsive moves, it's really valuable if you can get the radial to touch on the impulsive moves. So we got impulsive move here, we got it here, got it here. And technically on the month chart, we're still in a bullish pattern because we haven't had a cross. So what does that mean? So let's just bring over a Fibonacci measuring tool to the original move back that ended in 98. Let's extend that. Okay. So, it looks, it's very theoretically possible that just going to move this thing out of the way. Hang on here. Okay. So we're looking here at 14,202. Somewhere in 2024. Could it go more? Sure. But a couple things we're looking at here is we have a trend line, which is twinned with this trend line here. These things are very hard to make razor. I mean, I'm pretty decent at making postulations as to things within $1 or $2, depending on the overall valuations. But we're talking about huge valuations here. Like in these third world currencies versus the Western world currencies. But like late 2024. What do we got here? 2024, November 2024. You can't see this on your. I'll just bring this down one sec so you can see there. So you see that those dates down there. You can see, looks like got a bouncing pattern here. Looks like it's going to jerk around here because we're getting one of those triangles that we talked about earlier. But it looks like there's some kind of top that's going to happen right here around 2025. So if you're an Aussie if you've got Aussie money and you're in Indonesia, that'd be maybe a good time to change over if you're going to buy property or something. I think that's the time when the Aussie currency is going to have the most value in Indonesia. Now, I'm not saying this can't go up forever because I really don't know the politics of Indonesia, but if I didn't know, the thing about charting is that charting is designed so that if you don't know anything, if you don't know if there's any wars going on, if you don't know anything about their social situation, you don't know anything about their natural resources, all you have to look at the chart. If I was just presented with this chart with no other information to cloud my judgment, I would suggest that if I was going to cash out of Australian dollars for Indonesian currency. It'll be sometime late 2024 to May, and you'll want to keep your eyes very closely on this. Go open the investing app, and you can recreate this chart if you like. Draw this trend line. Basically, it's this trend line here from all these touch points you see here. Twin it up here. Once we achieve this trend line, I think that'll be the maximum value on the Australian dollar versus the Indonesian currency. And again, could it happen this quickly? Absolutely. Maybe something will happen. I can't even foretell. But I'm going to make it say it's a very safe bet that we're going to be going higher on the Australian dollar versus the Indonesian. And this may be very, as I mentioned the other day, that Australia looked pretty tough as compared to the baht. And again, I've never been to Thailand. What do I know about Thailand? I looked up the GDP, and the GDP looked pretty good versus versus how much they lay out. So I haven't done, in regard to this analysis, I have done no looking into Indonesia's fiscal environment, but I do. Those kinds of countries do tend to be a little more revolutionary and are going to be more so as we pull into the future here. Some stresses going on in the world. So yeah. Anyway, I hope this helps. When I have a couple minutes, if people have something they want me to analyze, I'm happy to look at it for them. I can give you targets and things like that. But again, in regard to the Indonesian currency, you want to basically be looking at the 12.872 level, and the real sweet spot is going to be 14.22650. So, if you've got some Australian money, you can hang on to it for a bit longer. It's going to appreciate against the Indonesian. But then you have to appreciate things that Indonesia are also going to rise in value or rise in cost. So when things go up in value, though, and it costs more to live, one thing that does typically go down is real estate, because people are more interested in being able to eat and keep themselves safe. And so there might be some deals on real estate, et cetera, et cetera. So there it is.